Good morning, everyone. Thank you, band. Happy New Year to all of you. So good to see you guys. Welcome to worship. I want to share a special welcome for those of you who worshiped maybe for the first time, or maybe for the first time in a long while, maybe since the beginning of the pandemic, over the Christmas holiday or last Sunday. So welcome. We're glad to have you here, or welcome back if that's the case. We're glad to have you here with us for worship this morning. So speaking of the holidays and Christmas, we are going to be picking up in the lessons from Luke, kind of where we left off in the Christmas season. Luke's gospel, you may remember, is the one that has the story about the shepherds coming. And so the shepherds come to visit the baby Jesus, born in Bethlehem. And then we jump ahead, and Jesus is still an infant, and Mary and Joseph bring him back to Jerusalem, bring him to the temple, where he is going to be presented before God. And that's the story where we hear about Simeon and Anna, the two elderly people who have been promised that they would not die until they were able to see the coming of the Messiah. And so that comes to fruition. And then all of a sudden, Luke says, okay, let's just skip ahead about a decade. And now we have today's story, which is the story of when Jesus is 12 years old. And this is a story that you may remember. It may be familiar to many of you, but this is really the only time that we have an example of Jesus as an adolescent. Now, as a parent of two adolescents, I very much wish that the gospel writers would have included more stories about Jesus in his preteen and teenage years, but don't get our wishes all the time. So here's the story of Jesus the preteen, Luke 2, starting with verse 41. Now, every year his parents went to Jerusalem for the festival of the Passover. And when he was 12 years old, they went up as usual for the festival. When the festival was ended and they started to return, the boy Jesus stayed behind in Jerusalem, but his parents did not know it. Assuming that he was in the group of travelers, they went a day's journey. Then they started to look for him among their relatives and friends. When they did not find him, they returned to Jerusalem to search for him. After 3 days, they found him in the temple, sitting among the teachers, listening to them and asking them questions. And all who heard him were amazed at his understanding and his answers. When his parents saw him, they were astonished. And his mother said to him, "Child, why have you treated us like this? Look, your father and I have been searching for you in great anxiety." He said to them, "Why were you searching for me? Did you not know that I must be in my Father's house?" But they did not understand what he'd said to them. Then he went down with them and came to Nazareth and was obedient to them. His mother treasured all these things in her heart. And Jesus increased in wisdom, in years, and in favor, or in divine and human favor. The word of God for the people of God. Thanks be to God. I want to start today by thanking Stephen Ingram for preaching last week. Stephen, great job. Thank you for preaching. Stephen, if you did not hear it, it's worth going back and listening to, of course. He talked about beginning the new year, getting it off on the right foot, setting a tone for what's to come, having a low anxiety start to the new year, talking about creating space for margin, setting our priorities in the right place, that kind of thing. Great message for the new year. And his message afforded my family and I the opportunity to leave town for a few days. We had a nice little getaway, got to find some sunshine. Not that we needed to, because it was 80 degrees when we left Birmingham, but we got to get away. And we took a couple of flights. And at this point, with my children having a almost 15-year-old and an 11-year-old, flying has kind of become old hat. They understand the drill. They understand what's expected of them. They've gone through security a number of times. This is what happens when you grow up with half of your family living 1,000 miles away. They travel on a plane to go see loved ones at holiday time, typically, and we've taken some family trips. So they have been given this great opportunity, and we as a family have been fortunate to be able to do some traveling. In fact, I would say that, well, dare I say, we've gotten kind of good at it. They know how to pack their own bags now. We don't go through their suitcases. That's a liberating thing. You know, like when your child can buckle themselves in their own seat in the car, like, oh, what a game changer that is. So is when they can pack their own bags for a trip. That's awesome. right? So there's some questionable things that get brought one time. I think, Wes, you brought a sign that said penguin parking only. It was a metal sign that you packed in a bag on a trip a few years ago, and we got to our destination. Was this important? But, we're learning, so we're getting there, and we've gotten along on the way, and we've gotten good at packing for these trips and traveling. So I was feeling pretty good about ourselves and how seasoned we are as a family of travelers. In fact, might have gotten a little bit too proud of how much we've accomplished. So on the return trip, we had a layover in Orlando. Now, I don't know how many of you who have had the great privilege of traveling through Orlando the week after Christmas. But we were not alone in that airport. And when we got on our plane, we were flying on Southwest, which means that you don't get a seat assigned to you, you just get a boarding group. And you get a boarding group based on how early you registered the day before. You checked in for your flight up to 24 hours in advance. And so we were boarding the plane, and as we were walking down, we passed rows 1 through 10. Those were the really organized people. Then we got 11 through 20. Those were the people who just were a few minutes behind the game. And then we got into the section where we ended up sitting, which was in the high 20s, which is also known as the area where everybody who has been in the Magic Kingdom and has reached their wits' end after a week's time is sitting with their kids. And so it was like the tantrum zone of the plane. And there were the digging for the applesauce pouches and all of the snacks and the moms with the bottomless purses of activities and that kind of thing. And that's the zone we were sitting in. And so we were all sort of thinking, we can't wait to put on the noise-canceling headphones and make this all blocked out. But all this chaos is going on around us. And I remember thinking to myself, gosh, isn't it nice to be such organized travelers who really have our act together? And as I was thinking about this, it occurred to me the irony of thinking that way as we were sitting in the last boarding group. Because somebody forgot to check in for the flight 24 hours in advance. It was more like 32 hours in advance, which put us at the very end of the boarding group, which put us back in the tantrum zone of the plane. Then I got to thinking, when we left Birmingham just a few days beforehand, one member of our party, who shall not be named, forgot that they had a full-sized pair of scissors in their carry-on bag, which meant that they were pulled aside by TSA, their bag searched, they were given a line of questioning, and when they were told, do you have any sharp items in your bag? Of course I don't have any. And of course, to the TSA, there's no difference between a scissors and a switchblade, and so she was pulled out. Oh, I said she. I already gave part of it away. This person was pulled aside, and the scissors was confiscated. But it didn't end there, because shortly thereafter, another member of our party left their identification in their pocket, and when pulling out their phone, their identification fell onto the floor of the concourse unbeknownst to them, and their name was paged over the airport intercom system. We did not hear that because the airport intercom system is a little bit lacking. And so a kindly police officer came by looking from person to person with their masks on until they recognized a pair of eyeballs that looked like the ones on the ID, and this member of our traveling party was given their identification card back and allowing us to continue our trip. Another member of our party promptly spilled down their front side moments after arriving at the airport and was wearing those soiled clothes for the next 15 hours. So yeah, we're really good at traveling. It was humbling, right? And I needed to be knocked down a peg or two. I wanted to have this idea that we were this family that had our act together, that we looked like we moved through life, and especially the complexities of traveling effortlessly, and that was scarcely the case. This whole idea of trying to kind of put yourself out there in the world and create a certain persona or an image of yourself that isn't very realistic is sort of what I guess I call the Facebooking of our culture, right? We all do this. We all try to present the best parts of ourselves and hide from the world the things that maybe look like our warts and our flaws. We don't want anybody to know about that, and we'd rather have them think of us as people that just, it all comes so naturally, so easily. We do this time and time again. In fact, many of us have just been through the season where we send out holiday cards, and it's a picture-perfect image of our family which oftentimes disguises the fact that putting together one of those family photo events is one of the most traumatic moments that we go through each fall as we try to get everybody to look at the camera at the right time in the right clothes and get the right shot. So I'm going to share with you, or I just shared with you a little bit ago from Luke, this story of another traveling party. And I would say the pretty exciting event that took place. One of the things I really love about this story is I want you to take away from this message. If the Holy Family can have this much trouble in one of their situations, then families out here, cut yourself a little slack. If Mary and Joseph, the father and the mother of our Lord Jesus Christ, can lose their son for 72 hours in a major city, cut yourself a little slack. Okay? So, let's talk about that story for a minute, shall we? We just heard that Mary and Joseph, they brought Jesus into town for the Passover. He's 12 years old, preteen, adolescent. He's probably getting a little bit more freedom than he's had before. He's maybe allowed to go off and explore the town or the area of the town where they're staying just a little bit. He's allowed to wander around and be with his friends and all of that. But something happens where on the day that they leave, they end up traveling all day on their way back to Nazareth. And on the way back, maybe around dinner time, Mary says, "Hey, Joe, have you seen Jesus?" I thought, "You'd seen him." "No, I haven't seen him either." And so they decide to retrace their steps. And they go back into the major city. They walk a day's journey back. And Luke tells us they look for 3 days before they find Jesus. And they finally find him in the temple of all places, which is where we know that all 12-year-olds would want to hang out. And Jesus is hanging out there in the temple. And Mary and Joseph find him, and they are so relieved. And they say, "You have caused us so much anxiety." And Jesus says, "But didn't you know that I would be in my Father's house?" And then Luke tells us that Mary treasures all of these things in her heart as they go back to Nazareth. Now, I have no doubt that Mary and Joseph were exceptional people. I have no doubt that Jesus was an atypical 12-year-old. But let me also say that there is a bit of suspicion that I have nagging at me which says that maybe this is Luke's Facebooking of this story. Let's go back and put ourselves in the role of Joseph and Mary for just a second, can we? There's a freak out that happens when they realize that they have left town without Jesus in tow. "What do you mean you haven't seen him?" Right? Their voices are raised. They go scurrying back. They look around. They ask everybody who's traveling with them. Then they head back into town. They are searching high and low. They have not slept for 3 days now because they have searched without ceasing for this boy that they cannot seem to find. They are nauseous with fear and anxiety. Did he run away? Did somebody take him? This is a moment of sheer terror for this family. And when they finally find him in the temple, Jesus gives a snarky, smart aleck response. "Didn't you think I'd be in my Father's house? Duh." Right? And then I'm thinking about how when I have been separated from my children when they were younger for like a few minutes without knowing where they were and finally finding them, I am fighting back the urge to throw up, shake them, yell at them, and embrace them with tears coming out of my eyes in great relief. But I am not treasuring these moments in my heart. Right? So, cut yourself a little slack. I am sure that Luke's point in this story is to say, isn't Jesus extraordinary? Look at him. As a 12-year-old, he was sitting at the feet of the rabbis in the temple, and they were learning from each other, and it was powerful and wonderful. But as a parent of 2 teens, I think to myself, wow, I wish there was more stories like this in the Bible so that I could gain a little bit more relief in saying, well, if Mary and Joseph survived it, we're going to survive it too. So there is good news in this story. And maybe we should cut ourselves a little bit of slack. But even if that's not really the good news in this story, let me share with you what I think are some other pieces of good news. The whole reason that Jesus could get separated from his family has to do with what's going on culturally at the time. There was not a requirement, but there was a strong suggestion that anybody who is able financially and geographically able to get to Jerusalem for these high holy days, they were encouraged to make a pilgrimage there. They were asked to make the effort to go there. And so, Nazareth being a couple days' journey away, Mary and Joseph said, let's take Jesus, and this was a part of their annual ritual. They went into the city. And what you did at that time was that you would travel with a big caravan. You'd travel with other extended family from your area. You would travel with other people from Nazareth. And so there was this large gathering of people who went together on their way to Jerusalem. And once they got there, there was worship, there were sacrifices that were made, there was praying, and I think that there was a whole lot of fellowship time. This was a time when it was celebrating our Jewish identity, celebrating our common history and our heritage together. It was a time to see friends that we don't see more than a couple of times a year, and they all made this way in this giant caravan through the countryside into the city of Jerusalem and probably camped out on the hillside of the Mount of Olives, a terraced hillside where there were large tent cities. And this was sort of where the tailgating happened for the big event, right? And I don't mean that in a disrespectful way. I mean, I think that this was, people were sharing food, going from tent to tent, saying hello, the kids were playing. It was a celebration. And they celebrated the Passover there together. And then on the day it was time to go home, it wouldn't have been like, hey, we're packing up and we're out of here in the next 10 minutes. No, they literally pulled up tent stakes, folded down their tents, loaded up the animals, got everybody corralled, and then the caravan started to make its way back to Nazareth. The Nazareth caravan went this way, and the other caravans for the other cities went this way, and they went back. So with that in mind, it's kind of easier to understand how Jesus was just assumed to be with the caravan, right? He was with that family, he was playing with those kids, he was talking to those people, and he just got swept up in it. We haven't seen him for a few hours, but he is making his way down the road with all of us. You get how that could happen, right? In fact, it's really kind of a lovely idea. It's really kind of a wholesome idea. The idea that we're looking out for each other, that we're caring for one another, that when there's kids, we treat them as our own. We make sure that they're not getting into trouble. We feed them if they're hungry. We help each other out. We're looking out for one another. And this caravan is kind of like the church. You know, when we take those baptismal vows, whenever we baptize an infant, or anybody for that matter, but especially I think it's easy to think about when we think about infants, we promise to do our part in nurturing and raising that child in the faith. And that means looking out for one another. That means for caring for those young kids. That means that I'm okay with you correcting my kids if they're out of line. That also means that I'm okay asking Sarah Clay if she'll drive my son home today because I've got a meeting after church. Like those kinds of things happen when you are part of the church caravan. But for the purposes of this sermon and this sermon series, talking about trying to do away with the Facebooking of culture and particularly of church, I want us to also feel very comfortable with who we are in this place as part of this church family. This is a place where we don't have to put on this artificial version of ourselves because we want everybody to think that we've got our act together, that everything is going smoothly, that we have all the answers, that we've got all our bases covered, that we come from the perfect families and that our weeks have not had a hiccup or worse. This is the place where above any other place in the world we should feel comfortable sharing our concerns, saying this is my struggle, offering ourselves as imperfect to one another. And in spite of that, finding a deep sense of belonging. Whether we're able to verbalize that or have been able to verbalize that in the past, the truth of the matter is that all of us seek belonging at a church. Theoretically, we can find a lot of the virtues that a church would instill in us elsewhere, but we have to find somewhere where we feel we belong. This is where I feel welcome. And better still, this is the place where I feel that I can let the Facebook version of myself fall by the wayside. We are part of this church caravan together. And I think that as much as it sounds the opposite of what we'd actually think, there's good news in the fact that Mary and Joseph found themselves in a community that they loved and trusted so much and that they felt so at home in that they could actually lose their son for a day. It sounds counterintuitive, but think about the trust. Think about the love. Think about the sense of community that would need to be there for this to even happen. The other good news that I think we find in this story, somewhat just under the radar, is that even when Jesus had nobody looking for him the first 24 hours, Jesus was in the temple, learning, growing, teaching, so that he could find us. Jesus would grow up to tell the story of the Good Shepherd who said not even one of the flock would be able to go astray without being brought back into the fold by the Good Shepherd. When no one was looking for Jesus, Jesus was beginning the work of looking for us. He was in the temple. He was being instructed. He was growing in his faith. One that would eventually say, I will always be on the lookout for you. And the good news is that we sit here today because the Good Shepherd, Jesus Christ, has already found us. Luke's intentions may have been, let me show you how exceptional Jesus is. He stayed behind to get extra instruction in the temple. But this year, I walk away from this story thinking, what a marvelous thing it is to be a part of such a community that there is that kind of trust. What a wonderful thing it is to be able to share our flaws and our downsides and let down our guard and still find belonging. And when we find ourselves most adrift, most apart from the flock, and failing to search for Jesus in our own lives, we can take comfort in remembering that he has always been searching for us. And in fact, we are already found. Let's pray together. Jesus, you are the Good Shepherd. And we thank you that we have found belonging in the flock. We thank you for your grace and that your mercy that you extend to us. And help us in all places, but especially in your church, to be comfortable with who we are, to see one another as you see us, as precious and beloved in your sight, to feel comfortable in this place and to bring all of the goodness and all of the complexity and all of the worry and all of the flaws with us to worship and to your community. We thank you, oh God, because in you we have already been found. Amen.